Are you in a closet?
No. I'm in a recording studio.
Sure.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, an exploration of the Hamilton College experience. This week's guest is Selena Coppock, class of 2002. Selena is a comedian, storyteller, author, actor, creator of the social media phenomenon NYT Vows. She's a podcaster, and the list goes on and on. And she's done all this while building a successful career in publishing as a book editor. Before we get into my conversation with Selena, I want to once again thank last week's guest, Ashley Merriman. The response to that episode has been overwhelming. So many people have reached out to say how grateful they were to hear Ashley share her story and how she persevered through some really awful experiences at Hamilton. As a friend said to me this week, it's hard to believe the head of the Rainbow Alliance got attacked and hit over the head with a bottle, and that wasn't the defining moment of our college career. In fact, there was as much outrage over the foul language used in the protests about the attack than there was about the attack itself. It says a lot about the collective mindset of the campus in the late 90s, and I certainly hope and believe that that has changed over time. And I hope students, anyone really, I hope anyone that heard Ashley's story heard her stress the importance of reaching out for help if you need it. And judging from the notes that I received from some current students, I'm encouraged to see that her message did in fact resonate. And if you want to reach out, we've now made it easier to contact the show. You can email us at hadiknownshow@gmail.com. Again, that's hadiknownshow@gmail.com. Send us a note if you want to get in touch with guests, as people have been doing with Ashley, or if you want to share your thoughts on the show, have any suggestions on who we should be talking to. We welcome the feedback. We welcome the praise. We welcome the criticism. I prefer the praise over the criticism, but we'll take it all. hadiknownshow@gmail.com. And of course, you can also connect with the show across social media. Had I Known Show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you haven't heard last week's conversation with Ashley, go to hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. Again, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. And speaking of Buzzsprout, yep, I got to plug it. If you've been thinking about starting a podcast, Buzzsprout has got you covered. It's what I used to launch this show, and it couldn't have been easier. Buzzsprout has tons of guides to help you find the right equipment at the right price to get started. You'll get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and so much more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters, like me, already using Buzzsprout to get your message out to the world. Sign up using the link in the show notes, and you're going to get a $20 Amazon gift card from Buzzsprout. And you'll support the show in the process. Let's get your podcast launched today using Buzzsprout. All right, let's get into this week's show. Oftentimes, when I talk to people about my major at Hamilton, I say that it is the epitome of the liberal arts education, American Studies, because I took classes from just about every department across campus. And that's what I found interesting about talking to Selena Coppock. Her career is a liberal arts career. There are elements from so many different areas. She's a writer, she's a comedian, she's an actor, she's an editor. I mean, all you have to do is search Selena Coppock on Amazon to see what I'm talking about. There you'll find her book, The New Rules for Blondes, Highlights from a Fair-Haired Life. You'll find her comedy album, Seen Better Days, and you'll find something like MCAT Biology Review, Graduate School Test Preparation, which she had a hand in as an editor at the Princeton Review. She's done quite a lot in her career, including creating the widely successful NYT Vows social media account, which parodies the New York Times Vows section and has a large social media following. I mean, it's remarkable what she's been able to accomplish building a successful career in publishing while also being an artist and an entertainer at the same time. And I think we came to this conversation at an interesting time as Selena tries to figure out what's next after the pandemic. And whatever that thing is, I think you can be certain that it'll be well written, it'll be interesting, and I'm sure it'll be funny, as much of this conversation was. So I hope you enjoy my conversation. Here is Selena Coppock, class of 2002.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Sorry. I'm over at my friends. We were just having drinks, and I was like, I got to do this podcast.
You bring in your own tech team, huh?
I know. Yeah, thank God, because I am terrible at this shit. Oh, my God. Okay.
Well, thanks for doing this, and I'm sorry to interrupt drinks.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, this is all I do is drink. I'm in Brooklyn. There's nothing to do, like, what else do we do in these pandy times, as I like to call them?
So, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I've been digging around a little bit. It's kind of hard to classify you.
Yeah, I do a lot of things.
You do a lot of things.
Yeah.
How do you have time to do all the things you do?
Oh my God, I know. Yeah, it's funny because I think actually in these like times of pandemic and staying home, it's made me realize just how much I mean, I graduated Hamilton in 2002 and I moved to, and I've done many things over the years, but like I've been in New York since 2006 and I've always had a 9 to 5 in publishing. And then I used to have a weekend job. I was a tour guide on the Sex and the City bus tour. And yeah, which was like the greatest job of my life. And I do stand up at night. It's always just been like, and I used to just like on any given day, I would leave my apartment, go work a full day. Maybe I'd have an audition at lunch because I auditioned for commercials and stuff. And then, have a bag packed. So like maybe pop to the gym after work, go do a show, do a spot, like maybe 2 shows and then be home by midnight or 2 and then do it all over again the next day. And I'm like, how?
Right. And are you, I mean, I know the in-person shows aren't happening now, but is that still sort of the lifestyle of the 9 to 5 plus performing plus a large social media presence, both personally and you got another thing going on with this New York Times Vows thing. Like you're all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, I love NYT Vows. I love so much. I mean, and that is like, in Hamilton, my education in Hamilton comes in so handy for NYT Vows. Like, oh my God, how many people did we meet who went to like Choate?
So explain what that is.
So NYT Vows, it's a Twitter and an Instagram account, and it's literally NYTVOWS. And I've been doing it for about 4+ years now. And it is I pretend to be the New York Times wedding section. So I refer to it as the gray lady does white weddings. And it's just a really fun way to sort of mock wedding culture, to mock the Times, to mock New York City culture, to mock socialites, to mock country club stuff, to mock classism, there's just so much fertile ground there, so I love mocking all of that stuff. And I love like the voice of the character. I always envision as like just, it's the gray lady. She's an old, lady who belongs to the Maidstone and she's better than you, and I'm like addicted to the New York Times wedding section. I've been reading it since I was 12, which is like, what a weird hobby as a child. But it's just because when I was a kid, my parents, Sundays in my family, I grew up outside of Boston, and Sundays were family day, and we weren't allowed to make any plans with friends. You had to stay home. And we would go to church as a family, and then you had to stay home. And, my parents would either like have a fire in the fireplace and, maybe cook some chili, or like it was I hated it at the time. And I look back and I'm like, what a genius idea, because, I would hang out with my sisters. Like I'm the youngest of 3 and hang out as a family, and my parents would read books and we would just have to entertain ourselves, whether it was, go in the woods and, build a fort or, like read a book or do a drawing, whatever. But for whatever reason, we used to get the Sunday Times. So I started reading it like cover to cover, very young, because there was, nothing else to do. And I loved the style section, and I loved reading about weddings and reading about like who's getting married and what college did they go to. And, so it's so funny because I felt like it just trained me to know like, okay, it's always going to be like that until last week, the bride worked, and like, it kills me how many brides in this day and age still are like, work, I'm done, I'm married, and just the name drops and the
Sure.
Mayflower stuff. I
Sure.
find that insane.
I
But
think I
so
think there's been a fair share of Hamilton graduates who have appeared in that section.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I openly play favorites. If there's ever anyone from Hamilton, I'm like, oh, from the greatest college in America, like I love playing favorites. Or sometimes I'll like throw in specific references. I'm like, oh look, a groom from Hamilton. Wonder if he ever took, wonder if he ever like partied at the Rock. And people are like, why does this account know specifics about Clinton, New York? And I'm like, oh, you believe it. But it's just so on, like on Sundays, I'll actually comment on the real section. And then Monday through Saturday, I just like make stuff up, and I just will sort of comment on, different traditions or, like someone the other day tweeted at me this trend in weddings that's like about like a donut wall. Just, like a lot of receptions now, instead of having cake, they'll have like a wall of like
Right, right, right.
donuts. And yeah, so someone tweeted it at me and I was like, my eyes are bleeding, like I love to be kind of like a mean and judgmental, and I try never to be mean to specific people. Like, if your wedding is written up in the Times, how wonderful and exciting,
Of
like
course,
I
of
never want to
course.
be mean to real people, but I like to be mean about trends, or be like,
Sure.
like, oh, the groomsmen all wore Chuck Taylors, so they're cool guys, stuff
Have
like
you
that.
have you ever gotten any kind of response from the Times?
Oh yeah, I've been in the Times twice,
There you
baby.
go. There you go.
I know, yeah. I give the Times a lot of credit for kind of like having a cool attitude about it and willing to be, that they're willing to be mocked. I was mentioned briefly in one article right when it first started. And then a few years ago, I was mentioned in an article that was literally, the title of the article was, "Do you like to mock the wedding pages? Get in line." And it was just like, about a few different people who've mocked them in different formats. But they very graciously called me and took a quote from me, and I said to them, I was like, I do this out of love. I do this
Yeah.
because my mom is from New York City, and she went to Nightingale Bamford, and and my aunt Kate belonged to the Maidstone, so I grew up going to the Maidstone Club. Like, I do this because I find it hilarious, and it's never super duper mean spirited. It's always a little bit, wink and a smile about drinking
Yeah.
G&Ts, and passing out. Like, it's
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
silly.
Yeah. So you've already written one book. Is there a book or any kind of next step for NYT Vows in the future? Feels like it's ripe for
Yeah.
a branch out.
I know. I mean, I wrote my first book, The New Rules for Blondes, which is like, it's a collection of silly essays about being blonde. I feel like, I mean, you remember the era when you could have a blog and get a book deal out of it? I feel like I was the last person that got that. And I almost feel guilty about it. But like, because I used to blog about The Bachelor and I had a pretty big following. So I felt like I sort of lucked into that book deal. And I learned a lot about, I mean, I work in publishing myself, but I work more so in academic and test prep. But, I learned a lot about the sort of journey of being an author and how brutal that can be. And a lot of that stuff just didn't come naturally to me, of like, you got to be shameless. You got to push hard. You got to like leverage everyone you've ever met who could help you get press. Like, I found, to be totally candid, I found a lot of that super uncomfortable, and I'm not good at it. And I think that's why my book didn't sell well.
Hmm.
But I do think that NYT Vows, like, it's a great internet thing. But I also think, so I have this wonderful agent now, and we've shopped around this concept just as like a small sort of gifty book, like,
Sure. Sure.
I just feel like it would make so much sense. One of those things that's, like, by the register, and maybe at a bridal shower, it goes into the goodie bags of,
Right.
like, just like pro tips from the gray lady,
Hmm.
about like ways to have a good shower or whatever. We've never been able to sell it, but I also almost love that. Like, I do think, and I think a lot about being an artist, and the journey of being an artist, and how you should feel about your art. And I think it's so important to just do your art because you love to do your art. And like, I've had a lot of people be like, oh, you should partner with Kay's like a certain jewelry company or Tiffany's or whatever. And I think the reason that I've been able to do whatever I want with NYT Vows is because I'm not beholden to anyone. And
Right.
I
Right.
do think that that's important to sort of hold on to, is like,
Hmm.
I don't answer to anyone. I don't do any brand partnerships. I've had a few brand partnerships approach me and they just never worked out. And that's fine by me. Like, I mean, I think it would be neat to do as just a little book, and I think it's so correct for that format. But I also just do it because I like to do it, and I like
Sure.
that I don't have a boss. Like
Right.
if I want to crank out 10 tweets in a day because I feel inspired, great. And if other days, like early in the pandemic, I felt very uncreative, and I was like, I'm allowed to just sort of let this be for a little while. I don't
Yeah.
have to write jokes, like no one's pushing me to do that. And I appreciate that.
There's no page view goal. There's no, yeah, you're not on any kind
Exactly.
of deadline or anything. Yeah. I was going to
Exactly.
ask you about um, what the pandemic is doing to everything you do. I mean, I think, in terms of being a performer, that has changed considerably. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's so odd because, like, I think for the past few years, stand up wasn't quite as fun as it used to be for me.
Why is that?
And I mean, I started doing stand up in Boston in like '04. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. Sometimes I'm embarrassed to admit how long I've been doing it, but I've been doing it a long time, and I've been doing it in New York a long time, and and there for so long, it's so fun. And like, I am a true believer in, like, nothing needs to come of this. This is its own
Mhm.
reward. I truly believe that the doing is its own reward. And I love live performance. I love connecting with people. I love showing young women out there that women can be funny, women can be on stage, women can make jokes about their experience or not, I mean, and being a voice. But around in late 2017, I well, first I was supposed to record an album in April of that year, and then Union Hall, I was going to record it there.
Hmm.
They had a fire like 3 weeks before I was supposed to record there. So it was just this sort of stressful thing where I was like, oh my God, okay, I was about to start promoting it. And then I was like, okay, wait. And they weren't sure if they were going to reopen. So we ended up moving the recording to the Duplex in the West Village, which is a wonderful and historic venue, great acoustics, great staff. But then it was in July. A good friend of mine from childhood passed away right. She got very sick right before I recorded. I felt kind of torn about if I should even record. I recorded the album because I felt like I just needed to. She passed away like 2 weeks later. And so I kind of like, I recorded these two shows, and then I kind of just set them aside because you want to get a little distance from your album before you
Hmm.
edit it.
Hmm.
And I sort of gave myself a very much like a French August to just like chill. I went to my friend Jenny's funeral. I just was like, do I even care? I mean, it was just one of those things of like, when someone your own age passes
Yeah.
away,
Sure.
like it
Sure.
was, so then I released my album in early December 2017, and I'm so proud of it. It's on Sirius XM. It gets great plays there. It's on Pandora. It's on iTunes. Like, it is
I
the
heard. I listened to it on Spotify.
yay! It's on Spotify. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Did you
I
like
did.
it?
I did. I did. We're gonna get into it. I have questions.
Okay, good. But I mean, and what's so cool about an album is, when you write a book, book publishing moves like molasses. It takes forever. So by the time the book comes out, you're like, oh, I don't even know if I like what I wrote. But with an album, I did feel like, I could kind of, these are jokes I love. These are my old closers. These are the jokes I believe in. So, I'm so proud of the album. I truly feel like it's the piece of art that I've created that the most reflects me. But just after I got that out, I was like, I don't know, and I don't know if it was the passing of my friend. I don't know if it was just sort of growing out of, I don't know what it was, but I don't enjoy stand up in the way I have the past few
Hmm.
years. It's just been a little bit of a struggle to keep doing stand up and storytelling. And so to finally answer your question, when all the pandemic stuff happened and the lockdown specifically in New York, I was almost like, God bless, like for me, it's been a great time to just, I think retire from live performance.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. And, during in late April, I turned 40, and, I've been doing stand up since I was like 24. Like,
Yeah.
I think I wish that I'd gotten certain other feathers in my cap that I never achieved, like getting a spot on a late night show or whatever. But, I didn't. And I don't think they're going to happen now at age 40 for a woman. Like and these are just pretty like, harsh realities. But I don't know. I just was like, I think I don't need to spend my nights in the basement of a bar anymore, you know?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that specifically because I imagine there are some hard nights, some hard rooms, some unkind people. I know it's not easy for women in stand up. I imagine the heckling was particularly harsh in some instances. That's got to wear on you.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, I'll never forget my first open mic that I did in New York. You know, I was 26. I had only been doing stand up for like 2 years, and I was performing like once a month and thinking that's doing stand up. You know, I was just so sort of naive. And the first open mic I ever did in New York, I was the only woman in the room, and there was probably 15, 20 men. And the host made a joke that they should lock the door and everyone have their way with me. Yeah. And then like I had to try, and all the guys are laughing, and I was like, now I got to go on stage and try to like it's like I'm at work right now. Like I'm trying to also work out jokes, you know? I mean, it was so, it really threw me off. And, you know, and I've been sexually assaulted. Like it really threw me off. And I was like, I'm just here also trying to work, you know?
Right.
Like, and there's just stuff like that. I mean, and every female stand-up has stories like that where it's, you know, it's people are like, it's so weird more women don't get into comedy. And I'm like, no, it's not.
Right.
You know?
My God. I mean, that's an awful thing for one human to say, you know, about another human. But then you just take it to the comedy level. The host is there to set you up. It totally just destroyed your ability to work the room.
Oh, exactly. I mean, yeah. And like, especially at an open mic, the host, like, we all know this is kind of a nightmare situation. Everyone's just working out jokes. The host, like, you know, I have friends who've hosted open mics, and like, your job is just try to make this suck less than it, you know, like, just try to like make this thing happen and not be so miserable. And try not to make me feel like I'm somehow, I mean, and that's why a lot of women feel like, you know, we're either that we're not welcome in stand up or that we're interlopers somehow. It's like, I'm sorry, men don't own stand up. You know, like I am also allowed to be here. And I mean, I've had so many young women come up to me after shows, young or old, you know, and just be like, thank you. Like, God, there's, you know, I mean, sometimes you'll see a show and it's 8 white straight guys in a row. Like, it's just sort of remarkable how much so many bookers seem to not even think about a diversity of voices. Like, I don't know, how many jokes can you hear about like Dungeons and Dragons or masturbation, you know? I'm sorry. God. These are not universal themes. I don't have a penis and I don't want to hear more jokes about it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you had to sacrifice your material because of that? Or were you able to tell the stories and work the material you wanted to as who you are?
Well, I always was very mindful of, as a woman, if you tell a few dirty jokes, you are considered filthy. Like, men can tell dirty joke after dirty joke after dirty joke, and people think this is just comedy. But as a woman, you know, say you have a 7-minute spot, if you have 2 dirty jokes within there, you're considered very dirty, you know? So like, I also like, I always, my style of comedy, I like to try to speak in universal themes about very silly things. Like, I enjoy silliness. It's my favorite kind of humor. So like, but I just would always be mindful of like, okay, if I'm going to tell this one joke that even alludes to sex or alludes to hooking up, I've got to have 4 other jokes around it that are not at all about sex, you know? And that, I think it's just a situation that men never find themselves in, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that a lot of people see comedy and think, oh, they're a funny person and they can get up and do that, whatever, and don't, you know, consider at all those other factors. You know, even to the point, I was doing some research on you and the work you do. I came across a video of you work in a small room and there was like banging in the background. And that really struck me as, God, you're sitting there trying to tell a story and there's someone hammering in the background, and like, how do you hang, you know, that's not anyone heckling you. That's not even being a jerk. It's just some other noise in the background, and you got to work over that, you know? And
Oh, I know. I mean, and that's why, like, you know, my brother-in-law who used to do some stand-up, he always says, he's like, stand-up is a skill that you learn 10 minutes at a time. Like, and you really can't speed through it. Like, you learn so much from random hell gigs. Like, when I first started out, you know, I was living in South Boston and I grew up in the Boston suburbs, and I would feature, and featuring is generally like 20, 25 minutes. I would feature at VFW halls in Western Massachusetts. And I mean,
it's a fun crowd.
Oh my God. Like, I mean, I like the man who would book me for those shows has passed away since, and he's just such a lovely guy. And like, I just so admire that he had enough belief in me that he was like, Selena, you can do this. But like, oh man, like they were just tough crowds. They did not
Yeah.
want to buy what I was selling, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it gave me such, I mean, you have to go through these situations where, yeah, like maybe, there's a waitress cutting through and they interrupt your setup and so that the punch doesn't land as hard, or,
Yeah.
like, or, they're dropping checks. So you got to do quick jokes because attentions are really, quick.
Yeah.
Or, like, yeah, I mean, I have this one story about that I was mugged in Boston.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a favorite. And I find, especially when I'm performing for, I mean, sometimes you show up to a show and you look at the crowd, and if they're older, okay, I'm not going to do my pop culture stuff. I got to just sort of do accessible stuff. So I always do my mugging story.
Mm-hmm.
Also, those audiences won't like swears, that don't really want to swear as much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you just learn so much from every experience. So, you can tell, like, I often will hear about younger comedians being sent on the road, and maybe they have 10 minutes and it's like, good luck. The road's going to kick you in the teeth and you don't know how to handle. Like, I mean, you just learn so much by doing. I mean, I remember doing a show in Lower Manhattan and a fist fight broke out like right before I went on stage. And, like these guys got removed from the bar. Like it was one of these bars where like the waitresses wear bikinis. I was just like, oh, what's going on? But they, so they remove these guys from the bar and they're like, the show must go on, and they bring me on. And I'm like, oh God, and like, so like, just like, and those times you kind of got to lean into the rowdiness, or like,
right.
I've done shows where you have I used to do bar shows, and this one bar show actually that formerly run by Phoebe Robinson, who's very big now, she had a wireless mic. And, if the crowd was too rowdy, like, I would just go into the crowd and go up to the, be like, hey, like you just learn so much by just doing it. And there's no substitute for simply doing it,
Yeah. Yeah. I've always been fascinated when I worked when I lived in New York. I would go to the Comedy Cellar a lot and go to comedy clubs a lot. I'm always been a big fan of stand-up comedy. But going to clubs and watching the dynamic, it's interesting to me that essentially your coworkers are also your competition.
Yeah.
And that creates a weird dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really strange because, yeah, I mean, it's such a funny phenomenon, because then also you are almost held accountable for them. Like I have a lot of friends who perform at the Cellar, and people will be like, well, do you approve of Louis C.K.? And it's like, why are they responsible for him?
Right.
But exactly. I mean, I guess your coworkers are your competition, but everyone has a really unique style. And
Sure.
So, I think your style really differentiates you. Like I know I used to do improv at Hamilton and just after Hamilton. And it's funny because I think that people like the improv community likes to be like, we're warm, fuzzy, we're welcoming. And in fact, like I found improv to be very cutthroat, because I think it's hard to stand out at improv. In theory, you shouldn't. It should all be about the, sort of the game of the scene and the team.
Yes.
And I think that stand-up has this reputation for being very cutthroat. And in fact, like I actually find it to be pretty wonderful, because I think that people are like, well, I don't know. I think there's this sense that like you wouldn't get an opportunity instead of me because we're just two very different products. It's like apples to oranges almost,
Got it. Yeah, sure.
I don't.
Would people help each other out? I mean, would you give each other notes and?
Oh, totally. I mean, completely. Like that's how I know. I mean, how you get passed at the Comedy Cellar, and by passed is what you mean by if you are allowed to perform at the Comedy Cellar. Yep. The way to get passed is you get recommended by two people, or getting managers or doing certain shows. I mean, I know, like, when I ever performed and made money on the road, before, like after I play those VFW halls, I would sometimes in the summertime play Fire Island at these really like these gay shows, like a lot of gay shows that were sort of drag queen shows, and that was
similar crowd to the VFW.
Exactly. I know, yeah. It's like the other side of that coin. They also hated me. No, just kidding. But I mean, that was always like, that was my friend Leah, who just sort of saw me as an up and comer, or my friend Sean, who worked at Comedy Central, was like, hey, do you want to do a live event with me? I think it's really neat how it's so much of people helping people that they know, or Or, I mean, I did punch-ups for the TV show Younger, and that was because, my friend Elliot Glazer was like, hey, Selena, I know you work in publishing, and I think you'd have good jokes. There's a sitcom about publishing. You want to do punch-ups? And I was like, great. Everything, so many things you get, it's just through, knowing people, friendship, working hard over the years. Even like the album that I did, it came out on Little Lamb Recordings. And they're a wonderful label. And that's through like friends who, like referred me to Shanali and Jason who run that label. And, it's, I think, it can be very cutthroat in many ways, but also like, the name of the game is sort of who you know, and just being good, being easy to work with, being dependable, and being, and having a voice and having like sort of having people know what your jokes are and be like, oh, Selena would be good for this,
Yeah. So let's go back. It's supposed to be a show about the Hamilton experience. So I guess we should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wrote some notes down.
Oh, you prepared more than I did.
And I'm half drunk. Oh, just kidding.
So how did you end up in Clinton, New York?
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, I loved Hamilton so much. I'm such a sucker for Hamilton. So both of my sisters went to Colby in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very tuned into NESCAC schools and New England and liberal arts and all that. But it's funny because because both my sisters went to Colby, I really kind of wanted to do something different. And I knew that I wanted Greek life. I don't know. There was something I found so interesting about sororities and fraternities. And so Hamilton really appealed to me because it seemed like the best of both worlds, where it was like this NESCAC thing. And not, but it also had Greek life because Colby had gotten rid of fraternities, and houses and the whole shebang in one fell swoop, which I thought was a really bad way to play it. And I knew that Hamilton still had fraternities and sororities, just that they'd taken houses away.
Right.
And I thought that seemed pretty neat, but I will admit my first choice was Wake Forest. And because I really wanted to go in the South. Like I thought I would do well in the South. And so I applied first early to Wake Forest. I got deferred, and I applied second early to Hamilton. And Hamilton, I remember when I went to tour Hamilton's campus, it was a rainy day. It was so crummy out. But the tour guide, who was this D-Phi guy, was just wonderful. So cool, so positive. And he, talked a lot about the focus on writing at Hamilton.
Yeah.
When I was an English major, I'm an editor now, the writing focus really appealed to me. It was just funny because I think that, on a rainy day, there was nothing super remarkable about it. And then I had an interview at Hamilton that I thought went really well. And I just felt like the interviewer seemed really cool. Just everything about Hamilton really clicked. So, when I got deferred from Wake Forest, I also think that was sort of a lark, I don't know if I really would have done that well that deep south because I'm a feminist and I'm a loud mouth, and that's hard enough to be up here,
Yeah, sure.
But so I applied second early, and part of it was I remember my college counselor at my public school really didn't think I would get in. And, the part of that was like, oh man, that's where I'm, that's why I want to go.
Prove them wrong. Yeah.
Exactly. So then, I got in second early and I was just so excited. And I knew one guy from the next town over who was at Hamilton, and he really seemed like a cool dude, and he was in SIU. And it just all as soon as, I was like, okay, locked and loaded. And I was really excited to go to a NESCAC school, but not the one where I would be in my sister's shadow.
Sure. Sure.
And I was excited to be 5 hours from Boston. I did not want to be super duper close to home, and no one from my high school was going to Hamilton, and that was part of my decision. I left my hometown with two middle fingers in the air. And maybe you know this about Western, it's a lot of rich kids.
Uh-huh.
And it's not like going to Hamilton isn't a lot
I was just going to say, you really got away from not going to Hamilton.
And I wanted to escape that, so I went to Hamilton. No, but I think I just wanted to go somewhere where I could start over completely,
Sure.
And so, I loved Hamilton every single day.
Did you partake in the Greek life?
Yes, I was in ATX.
Okay.
Yay, okay. Alpha Theta Chi till I die. And I loved ATX. I found I found rushing to be very stressful. But I did like, I mean, I found pledging to be very fun and exciting. And then I enjoyed being, I enjoyed having formals. I enjoyed connecting with younger girls. Like, I loved having a little sister and a little, and, like, I mean, I just, I really, a sorority life gets a bad rap, I think. And I think a lot of that is sort of like understood misogyny of like women are shitty to other women. No, we're not. Like that, I think that is a lie perpetrated by the patriarchy. But I don't know. I loved being in ATX, and
Mhm.
I lived with girls in KDO. I lived with girls in PBX. Like I was pals with Gamma Xi. I
Well, at a
found
school that size, it's hard to just stick yourself with just a small group of people and that be it.
yeah.
You wouldn't be able to be social if that were the case.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that was one thing. I was listening to some previous episodes of yours, Dave, and that
Oh,
was one thing that like I think maybe is the difference between, people who were there during the res life decision
yep.
or before it.
Yep.
And I'm sure that is frustrating because when you sign on to go to a school and you think you're going to live in a frat house or, like, and
Yeah.
suddenly it's taken away, like I get that was have been very frustrating. For me, I loved that, like I could live, I mean, my sophomore year, I was newly in ATX and two of my roommates were pledging KDO and one was just chilling with PBX and then senior year, a bunch of us were at ATX and we had an independent roommate. And I thought that was so neat that like, I think there was less sort of people being kind of in different different factions rather of like, you only live with your one house. Like I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
people all sort of lived together and partied together.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about it, I was going to say, it does feel like by the time you got to Hamilton, the school had probably figured out a little bit about, as I've said before, class of '99, we lived through the 4 year growing pain, and I think as you were
That's
coming on,
tough.
they started to figure that out a little bit.
Yeah.
I never really had an interest in pledging a fraternity. However, I played rugby. That was like a
Mm.
fraternity, but
Oh,
that also had
completely.
members of other. I mean, I think any group you're involved in is
Yeah,
can act like that if you make it so. So it's just about
exactly.
whatever you're into.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And that was one thing. I mean, I love like at Hamilton, I was sang in the Hamiltones. I
Mm.
was in Yoda Pez, and I loved, yeah, in the Hamiltones, like it was really neat. Like there were girls from Gamma Xi in there and KDO and then dudes from, Chipsters and TDX. And like it was, and then you'd always see these freshman kids showing up exhausted and like kind of confused. And you're like, oh, pledging. Okay. Like, I mean, but it was a neat way to just connect with everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned theater in high school. You mentioned Yoda Pez. The performance bug has been in you for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, and it's sort of in the family. I mean, my sister Laurel lives in Los Angeles, and um, she's in the Groundlings, which is like a comedy theater or comedy troupe, and she's the face of Toyota on all their commercials. Which do you know
Okay.
the character? Her name's Jan.
At the desk, she sits at a desk or something like that, right?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
That's
yes,
my
yes,
sister
yes.
Laurel. We're all
Awesome.
we're all, yeah. I mean, my mom bought a Toyota just so she could like get Laurel in the mail. Like she's in all their mailing pieces too. But anyway, long way of saying, yes. And my grandmother was a dancer in the Ziegfeld Follies, and I mean, there is sort of a history in more so on my mom's side of the family of performing
Uh-huh.
and all that stuff. And yeah, I've always really enjoyed it.
Was that the plan post Hamilton?
Um, no, not really. I mean, I think that, I was an English major. I've always been very pragmatic. And so, I never was like, oh, I'm going to go just audition places. Like, I always felt like I knew I needed to have what I would call a normal job.
Mm.
And then I mean, I also wonder if it's a failure of imagination on my part that I think I just never thought you could really make money at, comedy and performing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I always felt like, well, you've got to have a normal job and then you could do your fun thing at night.
Mm.
Um, which, perhaps I was selling myself short, but yeah, I guess, I mean, it's funny because I don't think I really, when I majored in English, I majored in that because I love reading and writing and I think I'm good at it. But I don't think there was a lot of forethought as far as like career, what could
Yeah,
happen next,
yeah, yeah. It's interesting you say the pragmatic thinking, and I wonder because I've often wondered this about myself if when you get to that point in your college career, especially at Hamilton, where you're thinking about, all right, what am I going to do next? if you don't have that, I'm going to go pre-med or pre-law. If you don't have that set in, you see a lot of these other people getting recruited on campus from banks and getting early offers and signing bonuses and so forth. And like, oh man, they're going to make a lot of money right out of school. What the hell am I going to do?
Yeah.
And then, because I remember I thought doing something like this would be more what I did. I had a job in radio my senior year on campus, like at a radio station in Utica, which was
Oh, wow.
an interesting experience. And had I wanted to stay in Utica post college and make $7 an hour, I could have been a professional.
Wow.
But I was like, I can't. That's like that. How am I going to survive on that?
Yeah.
They're making all this. I need to go get a real job, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's the path I took. And I often wonder, was there pressure of just, you know, peer pressure of all these other people going to get quote unquote real jobs? I need to go do that.
Oh, I know. I think about that a lot because like when I started being a tour guide, which is just my weekend job, a lot of my tour guide coworkers were like either they had previously performed on cruise ships or they were like personal shoppers / tour guides / you know, like they all had these sort of fascinating careers where they kind of cobbled it together. And I was like, you know, I think because growing up, my dad was a lawyer, my mom was a teacher, like it didn't really occur to me like, oh, you could kind of pave, you know, a circuitous path that's a little bit different and surprising, you know, like I think I very much was like, you work 40 hours a week. That's the only way you have insurance. And that's what you got to do, you know?
Right. But I feel like you figured that out though. You were able to do that. And I assume that you've made sacrifices because of it on your performance in art, but I don't sense too much. Recorded an album, you're a successful Twitter thing going on, wrote a book.
Yeah.
You figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one thing that has always, whenever I speak with younger comedians, I've heard a lot of older, like I've heard certain comedians advise younger comedians like and claim you can't have a 9 to 5. You're not serious about comedy if you have a 9 to 5. And I think that's really dangerous and irresponsible because like, but also it's something that I've learned in comedy. Comedy, you know, as maybe as much as this sucks to say, it's a lot of rich kids who don't have jobs and they don't have to, and their parents pay their rent and they pretend that they're successful at comedy because they're always free to go on auditions. You know, like there's this sort of mythology, like you've always got to be free to go on auditions. You've got to be free to do your art. And I don't like, I mean, for me, what's worked is I've worked at one publisher for a long time. So they trust me and I have a lot of vacation time and I have a lot of personal days. So if I need to, you know, like I filmed a role on this Amazon Prime sitcom called Red Oaks and I was able to like, you know, take the days off just to go film this TV role and they were psyched for me, you know?
That's great.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like, I think that a lot of, and this is sort of real talk, but I think a lot of rich people in comedy or in performing will have you believe that like, you can't have a job. You've got to focus on your thing. And I think if you want it enough, and I did for a long, long time. Like I kept all these plates spinning and I'm a great book editor and I've, you know, always been able to like fully commit to my 9 to 5 and be very focused during that. But then at night, flip around and, you know, do these jokes or take 2 vacation days so I can go headline in Syracuse. Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of myself for that reason. And I also think like, I mean, it's sort of what works for you. Like I have friends who are dog walkers in Brooklyn and, you know, they pay their rent walking dogs and, you know, maybe they don't have insurance, but they make it work and they're comfortable with that. And that's great. Like for me, I felt like I always needed to have insurance and a little bit of a cushion, just because I find it very hard to be creative when I'm extremely anxious about money and paying rent. Like, so I always was like, you know, even if I'm stuck in the office 8 hours a day, that will help me be creative at night because at least that, you know, like I can sort of know that I can pay my rent.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'm very proud. Like my sisters and I always say like Coppock girls, we work hard, like we hustle all day, we hustle all night, like we make it happen. And yeah, so, you know, and in the literary world, like I've heard a lot of people be like, you know, you can't write a book unless you go to, you know, a cabin in the woods and write a book on a retreat. And it's like, oh, fuck you. You know, like I wrote a book while I worked 40 hours a week, you know, like, I don't know, Cry Me a River. Like I wrote a book on the weekends and at night.
Yeah. It's a matter of what you want and what you make of it. And I think,
Exactly.
and given your, hands in a lot of different things, that's the kind of the world we live in right now, right? It's not just there's one path. There's not, you
Yes.
have to, book the late night spot and that's going to turn into something else. You can do something on Twitter. You can work, the odd room here and there, or
There's so many pathways, and it's important, just to be prolific and do what strikes your fancy,
Mm.
like I think to me, when you can tell that an artist is doing this art just to try to get somewhere, like you can smell it. Like it's
Mm.
so transparent and it's so gross.
Mm.
And I think that those things don't inspire the audience. They don't interest the audience. And I have a dumb podcast about candles. Like literally, it's just me talking about candles with my friends. And I love it. I mean, I get no listens. Like it is not anything that, for fame, but I just like doing it. And I do, and maybe this is why my career is not farther along, but like, I just think there's value in like doing what inspires you and sparks joy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and not just doing it for fame or because you think some Asian is going to like this,
Right, right. People can sense right away if you're authentic and you're
Yeah,
enjoying it. Yeah, for sure.
exactly.
You mentioned your love of Hamilton, and
Yeah.
I imagine there's some love back because I want to understand how the Tina Fey thing came about.
Am I the luckiest Hamilton grad in the world? I know. Yeah, people are all like, "Did you have to audition?" I'm like, no. Like, yeah, got
So
Lisa.
you just got a phone call one day that said, "Hey, you want to interview Tina Fey?"
Literally, yes, yeah. I mean, and I remember I was at the office and I was like shaking. I mean,
Yeah,
so Lisa Magnorelli, who I just love. I mean, what a gem. Because Lisa Magnorelli came back to Hamilton to work, I
yep.
believe my junior or senior year.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everyone loved her immediately. I mean, what's not to love? Like, she's just so fantastic. And I think there was a lot of connection too, because she was also a sorority girl. Like, I just think that at least ATX, we really loved her and like respected her and just really saw her as like a trusted advisor, and watching her, just blossom at Hamilton in a professional capacity is so cool. So yeah, I mean, and Hamilton's been so good to me. Like they, over the years when they've done different like FebFest events where they'll have different events in different cities, they'll like promote some of my random shows. God bless them. And and yeah, I mean, and different Hamilton people have like come out to see, like Sharon Rippey came out to like see one of my stand-up shows in New York, like just such kind hearts. So yeah, Lisa just called me and was like, oh my gosh, we booked Tina Fey, would you want to interview her? And I mean, it was so remarkable, and I felt like I'd won the lottery. Like,
Yeah.
it was such a cool experience, although admittedly like kind of stressful.
I don't know. I don't know. Kind of. Yeah, I would imagine it was immensely stressful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really
Did you feel
exciting.
like, was there a part of you that kept saying, "I'm going to be friends with her. I'm going to work with her," and this
Oh,
is
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like my friends and family were like, "Selena, you have different ideas for TV shows, and you're meeting Tina Fey." And I always try, like, because I mean, I've been in this industry long enough. It's like hanging out in the green room with someone for 10 minutes does not a friendship make.
of
Like
course, of course.
I tried to like rein everyone in. But Tina was super duper gracious. But I mean, I will say this, like I ran all my questions by her team in advance and they were approved, and because we wanted to, I mean, she's a guest, you want to make sure you're talking about
Yes,
topics she wants to talk about and topics she's comfortable talking about.
yes.
um, but like I haven't done many or any interviews of that length, and we like cranked through the questions pretty quick. Yeah, I mean, I kid you not when I tell you, and I can't believe I'm admitting this, but like the last like 40 minutes of that interview, which is almost half of the interview, I am just like winging it based on, thankfully, like I know a ton about her and about Chicago comedy and, and her story. And like, but I literally was just sort of winging it and being like, okay, you and Amy Poehler are pals. Okay, Dratch and Faye, like I know about the SNL writers room. Let's talk about that. But
Yeah.
in retrospect, and I say this with all due respect and love for Tina and her crew, but like, I wish that they'd been like, hey, wait, maybe you need more than 11 questions, But like, it's a 90-minute interview. Like, in retrospect, I'm like, what? I should have had like 50 questions, Um, but I think it really speaks to her conversational skills, and not to pat myself on the back, but my ability to chat with anyone. That, I mean,
Clearly.
But yeah, I mean, we just kind of like, had a great conversation. And
Yeah.
I asked some of my friends who watched it, I was like, could you tell that like the second half, like we both knew that I had to run through the questions, and they were, a lot of my friends were like, no, it just seemed to get more conversational. And I was like,
Oh,
okay.
that's what you want. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, as long as I just wanted to make sure that I was respectful to her, I did right by Hamilton, like that I conducted a good conversation that people found useful. Because, I felt I felt so proud to be representing Hamilton, and I just wanted to do right by Hamilton and make sure that Tina felt like she was taken care of.
Yeah. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So do you guys hang out all the time now?
Yeah. So afterwards I gave her a best friends forever necklace, and she wears it. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'll teach you the secret handshake that I taught her.
Yeah, you nudged Amy out of the way, and now it's I get it.
Exactly. I was like, you got a new blonde bestie, and her name's Selena.
So you're coming up from Weston up to over to Clinton, New York.
Yep.
Anything you wish you had known?
Gosh. I guess, you know what? I thought, and maybe this speaks to a little bit of my own imposter syndrome, and I don't know if this speaks to, being a young girl, but I always felt like I got into Hamilton by the skin of my teeth. And I went to a great public high school, and I took AP classes, and I did okay on the SATs, but like, I think that I was a little spooked when I got on campus. Like, I just thought everyone was smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
And once we dove into classes, I was like, you know what? I'm okay. Like, I'm ready to do this work. I'm capable of doing this work. And just because you didn't go to private school doesn't mean you're not ready for Hamilton. And I think that took me a little while to sort of get my footing at Hamilton, as far as like realizing that I deserved to be there and that I was just as smart as everyone else there. So I wish that I'd had maybe a little like, angel on my shoulder to be like, you can do this, girl.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. I remember a very similar
You feel
experience. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I too. I don't think I know I got in by the skin of my teeth, and I still can't. I keep waiting for them to knock on the door and take the diploma back.
Oh my God, I know. The kids there now are such smarts.
Oh my God, I know. Oh yeah, I would never get it. But no, I think same sort of thing, coming up from public school and like being intimidated by these prep school people who just seemed to know what they were doing.
Yeah.
And then being in class early on, and you'd hear them waxing poetic about whatever the reading was, and I probably hadn't even done the reading. And then it took me a while to realize they didn't do the reading either. They're full of shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I know. I remember realizing that some people who I thought were these smarties who had it all figured out were actually kind of dum-dums. And I was like, what? Like, but I will admit, I mean, I remember being in one history class, and God bless my friend Sasha, who lived in my hall. Like, I mean, she really reviewed a lot of like the exact moments of World War I with me that like, and granted, she was a history buff and she was a history major, but there were some moments where I just felt like I needed, like, I think some other people had a better foundation than I did.
Sure.
I don't know. I felt like there were moments where I really felt like I deserved to be there. And there were other moments where I felt like I didn't. I mean, but that's being in a new environment. You're sort of just figuring it all out.
Of course. Can we talk about Guns N' Roses for a second?
Oh, yes, please. Because you know what yesterday was? The anniversary of the release of Appetite for Destruction. Yes.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. I think it was, 27 years ago? Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. So Appetite was the official album of the Hamilton College rugby team when I was there. I don't know if you knew that.
Really?
Oh, it wasn't an away game unless we were cranking that on our way into. We'd roll into every campus with our windows down, cranking "Welcome to the Jungle."
Oh my God, I love it! That is so cool! Oh my God! Oh, I love it.
So
you're in the jungle, baby, and you're gonna die.
That's exactly right.
I love it.
Right. And then a bunch of like Hamilton kids get out of the car and like, we're not that intimidated.
I know, and they're like, excuse me, which way to the rugby field?
That's exactly right. But anything we cover, anything we didn't cover that you want to cover?
I know, it's funny because I
took notes.
I know. Well, yeah, I like wrote down some notes of like my favorite professors, but I was like, I don't know if we'll even talk professors.
We can. I'm trying to have some on. I've had a couple on so far. I got to talk.
Yeah,
to more,
I listened to Mark Cryer. I love him.
I didn't know him. How great was he?
Yes. Oh, Professor Cryer is phenomenal. Professor Cryer's first year at Hamilton was my sophomore year, I believe.
Yeah, it was right after he started in '99 after I graduated. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I had a class with him, and I've always just found him to be such a wonderful guy. And I loved what he talked about of like, Hamilton being like, you're a Black man and we don't have to ignore that, and I mean, I always found him to be a really just such a confident, wonderful guy. I mean, I had so many, like, it's funny because I'll talk to, both my sisters went to Colby, and, they liked Colby well enough, and they had good professors, certainly, but like, they're not, like, none of their professors do they remember by name. Like literally my parents to this day are like, oh, Professor Wheatley was amazing. Edward Wheatley, English professor, one of my favorites. Like, I mean, I was just chatting with friends who I'm having drinks with about, like, I was like, let me just write a quick list of my favorite professors from college. And I was like, literally every single one of these professors, I've either been to their home, just off campus, or I've had drinks with them at the pub or at Cafe Opus, like, just what a unique, cool experience of, like, and this was back also, Gene Tobin was the president when I was there, and I absolutely adored him. I think he was a wonderful president. And that was when, the president would have everyone over to his house for dinner and drinks before graduation. And I mean, like, my parents were like, just sort of stunned by the experience at Hamilton of, going to the president's home for, like, a catered dinner and having a drink at the pub with a beloved women's studies professor, or, like, I don't know. I like, sometimes people are like, oh, all NESCAC schools are the same. And I don't know, I think my experience versus my sister's, like, it's just, and, this isn't to knock Colby, although I will every day, all day, gladly. But, like, I just think, I don't know, I found Hamilton to be such a special place.
That was a fun one. She's funny. We talked a lot about the different elements of her work, and I want to make sure listeners have a chance to check out that work. Go to selenacoppock.com, SELENA, Selena, Coppock, COPPOCK, selenacoppock.com. There you can get some good examples of her work, including a video of her telling the mugging story that was referenced during the conversation, and that one is definitely a must-see. Her stand-up album, Seen Better Days, you can get that on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify. Check out NYT Vows on Twitter and Instagram, her parody account of the New York Times Vows section. She's created a wonderful character in The Gray Lady. If you're into candles, check out her podcast, 2 Wick Minimum. You can find that on social media at 2 Wick Minimum or wherever you get your podcast. I mean, it just doesn't end. I don't know if she sleeps. My thanks to Selena Coppock for joining. It was a really fun conversation. I had a lot of laughs, and I'm glad I got a chance to get to know her. It was fun. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM. Had I Known show on social media. hadiknown.buzzsprout.com for all previous episodes, and where later today we'll post this episode. My thanks, as always, to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on this show. And as always, we'll have Doc play us out. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week.